Let's talk about the battlefront. Russia has begun a counteroffensive operation aimed at taking back territory from Ukrainian troops.
Now, the purported visuals from the battlefield as well as testimonies from bloggers monitoring the situation all point to heavy fighting. According to Major General Laudinov, who commands Chechnya's Akhmat Special Forces fighting in Kursk, Russian troops have gone on the offensive. The Russians are reportedly taking back control of about 10 settlements. In Kursk, Laudinov is also deputy head of the Russian Defense Ministry's military political department. He said, and I'm going to quote here, "The situation is good for us. A total of about 10 settlements in the Kursk region have been liberated," quote unquote. Now, additionally, new footage circulating online shows Russian troops pushing Ukrainians back in Kursk. Pro-Russian channels on Telegram released video clips that they claim show Russia's 51st Guard Regiment near a settlement called Snagost.
The Russian forces are said to have taken several villages on the west of Russia from the area that Ukraine said to have carved out in Russia. The Russian Defense Ministry said troops had defeated Ukrainian units at a number of villages, but there was no independent confirmation or immediate comment from Ukraine.
Russia has yet to confirm the counteroffensive. Ever since Ukraine sent thousands of its heavily armed troops across the border and into Russian territory. According to the Russian military, Ukrainian casualties have surpassed 10,000 during the month-long incursion.
Ukraine weakened its battlefield position, especially in East Ukraine. Ukraine hoped that its Kursk operation would force Russia to pull troops from eastern Ukraine. But instead of pulling troops from the Donbas front line, Russia continued to push forward with Ukrainian troops focused on the Russian region.
Now, Pokrovsk is a logistical hub. This is one area where Russia has been directing all its forces towards, an industrial powerhouse, and it is seen as a gateway between eastern and central Ukraine. If the city falls, Ukraine not just loses supply lines in the entire region, but Russian forces acquire a launchpad for mounting more assaults, this time deeper into Ukraine. Now, this means easy control of other strategic Ukrainian cities as well, along with Luhansk and the Donetsk province, which comprises the eastern Ukraine's Donbas region and whose control remains the main objective of Russia's war.
Now, Ukraine cannot afford to lose Pokrovsk. Yet, knowing how close the Russian threat is in the east, Ukraine pushed on with its Kursk objective in the hopes of using it as a bargaining chip.
If earlier Moscow was ready for peace talks with conditions, now it isn't. Russian President Vladimir Putin has dismissed the idea of peace talks in the immediate aftermath of Ukraine's Kursk raid.
All right, to discuss more on this, we are being joined by John Erith from Washington, D.C. He is a senior policy director for the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation in Washington. He is also the former member of the U.S. delegation to NATO. Thank you so much for taking your time and joining us today. Now, let me begin by asking you, Putin has given a clear warning saying we will make appropriate decisions based on the threats that will be created for us. Now, what kind of a Russian response do you think we can anticipate? Is this a rhetoric or it's a clear warning?
We have heard many such warnings from Russian leaders over the past 2.5 years. There was a warning if any military aid would go to Ukraine at all. There was a warning if the aid was not strictly defensive in nature. There was a warning if aircraft, if tanks were provided. So this is yet another in a series. The rhetoric is perhaps a little bit stronger at this time. And because we are dealing with a nuclear-armed power in Russia, it is well to take such warnings very seriously. But that's why the President of the United States has a very difficult job. He has to balance the risks of authorizing the use of weapons at military targets in Russia with the possibilities that Russia will take some other kind of action. It's difficult to understand what kind of action Russia would take against NATO countries. NATO is very well defended, but the risk is there.
Mr. Edith, as you mentioned, that the rhetoric is stronger this time, and even a little earlier, Putin made it clear that there will be no peace talks now after the Kursk incursion happened. Now, at this point, now it is a lot of reports are suggesting that US is almost on the brink of giving that permission to Ukraine to use those long-range weapons inside Russia. It is assumed that those permissions will be given with restrictions, that these are the areas that you can target and perhaps these are the areas that you cannot. But who's to say what or how Ukraine will be using those weapons, given the nature of the war? Because Russia is not holding back, so Ukraine will consider itself, justified in not holding back either. Do you feel that raises tensions for the West even more?
It's very difficult to speculate on the nature of confidential discussions between governments, so I will not do that. I can say from a military point of view, there are obvious things that Ukraine could target, military targets, such as command and control facilities, troop assembly areas, transportation hubs, things like that, that would be high-value targets. These are high-value weapons. They're limited in supply. They're expensive. So the traditional military doctrine would be not to fire them blankly against muddy villages, but to hit such high-value military targets as command.
Right. Talking of diplomatically, where does the peace talks now stand? We have countries like India, trying to solve this conflict, maybe diplomatically, but where does this warning leave the peace talks now?
The peace talks are about where they have been for 2.5 years, which is to say at a standstill. Russia refuses to discuss terms of peace with Ukraine unless Ukraine surrenders significant portions of its territory. Ukraine refuses to discuss peace while Russia is occupying territory. Those basic conditions have not changed. Both sides have indicated that when they do, they will be open to peace talks. Many nations, the initiative of Switzerland was particularly notable, have indicated that they are willing to facilitate such talks, but we have not entered the conditions yet where that would be likely.
Definitely, times seem to be getting more and more tense as the war is very much into its third year. One would have assumed by now it would start settling down at some point, but it doesn't seem so, at least not in the near future. Thank you so much for joining in, sir. That was John Edith joining us from Washington, D.C. Always a pleasure hearing your thoughts and your analysis on current issues.
Thank you very much.